everyone, this is Rabbitearblog and welcome to TV episode Roundup episode 2. So for this video, I managed to review up to 5 shows this week. Last week I only reviewed 3 shows because at the time there wasn't a lot of shows coming in September, but since it's October more shows are starting to come in, so I was able to review a bit more shows this week. But one of the shows on this list I didn't really do a video review for because I was thinking to myself, I shouldn't do a video review for that show. But I'll let you know as the video goes on which show I didn't do a video review for. Now, before I get into my worst pick of the week to my best pick of the week, I would like to remind everyone that new videos will be posted up every Sunday. It could be Sunday morning, Sunday night, or Sunday evening, depending on when I could get the videos posted up. And if you happen to see any videos posted up throughout the week, then that must mean that there was a bit of TV or movie news that was released during the week that I wanted to cover. So those would be considered special videos. And also, TV episode roundup videos will be posted up every Monday. So expect to see new videos for the TV episode roundup series every Monday. So now let's get started into this list of my worst pick of the week to my best pick of the week. And the worst pick of the week for this week is number 5, The Inhumans Divide and Conquer. So what happens in this episode is that we still continue off from the pilot where the warrior humans family are still stranded on Earth and they're still trying to figure out a way to get back to their home planet. But in the meantime, we start to learn more backstories from some of the humans characters like Black Bolt and Karnak. And we get to learn more about how Black Bolt can't really speak because how his powers if he starts talking he destroys stuff with his voice. And then with Karnak we start to learn more about his tattoos and how they affect his powers and stuff like that. And also we start to see a bit more of Crystal in this episode. Like the last episode, Crystal was still stranded on the humans planet when Maximus ends up taking over the planet, and we start to see Crystal take some action in this episode. And that's pretty much what happens in this episode. So overall, my opinions about this episode is that I think it's a bit of a step up from the first episode. Like at least there's a more attempt to develop some of the characters. Like I like the way that they gave us more exploration with Black Bolt's character about how he can't really talk because how his powers would make him destroy things if he even utters a word. And then we learn more about Karnak, which I think was the best part of this whole episode, was learning more about Karnak's backstory and how his tattoos affect with his powers and his social standing on the humans planet. And I like the fact that we got to see a bit more Crystal in this episode, and I hope that Crystal becomes a bigger character in the later episodes. But despite all of that, I still think that the pacing for this episode was still really slow, and I still think that the characters were very flat. We still don't know a lot about these characters, and I hope that the later episodes would try to speed up the pacing and try to make us actually like the characters. Like I'm still in this phase where I don't really care about all the characters, so I'm hoping the next episode will be a little better about developing the characters and speed up the pacing. So I gave this episode 2.75 stars, and that was number 5 and my worst pick of the week. So number 4 is Kevin Probably Saves the World, the pilot episode. So what happens in this episode is that we find out there was a man named Kevin who ends up moving in with his twin sister and her daughter Reese. And it turns out that Kevin had at one point tried to commit suicide after his brother dies. And so he ends up living with his sister and her daughter to try to get over his trauma of trying to commit suicide. And later in the episode, there was a meteor that ends up coming to Earth. And it turns out that the meteor was an angel named Yvette who ends up telling Kevin that he's destined to save the world because God gave Kevin the power to try to save the world. And of course Kevin is still struggling with trying to discover this realization about him saving the world while also trying to repair his relationship with his sister and his niece. So that's pretty much what happens in this episode. And this was the episode I didn't really do a full TV episode review on because I was thinking to myself, if I try to do a video review about this episode, it'd be really hard to do. So I decided to just go ahead and talk about this episode in my TV episode wrap up series. So this will probably be the show I won't really do any video reviews for but I'll probably still talk about it in the TV episode Roundup series. So, what are my thoughts about this episode? I thought this episode was really interesting. Like, out of all the shows I've been watching this fall, this was like the only show that wasn't really a superhero type of show, and it was more like a fantasy type of show with religious undertones in it. And I found this premise to be very unique. Like, I think it's like a Ghost Whisperer mix. It's like the TV series Ghost Whisperer meets Touched by an Angel. So I'd be interested to see what direction the show goes. And I like how this show is able to balance comedy and drama together. So I think we're looking at a dramedy type of series, but I'm interested to see how they're going to explore Kevin's character in this series, and how he tries to cope with trying to save the world even though he just got out of almost committing suicide. So I gave this episode 4 stars, and that was my number 4 pick. So moving on to number 3 is Ghosted BMO. So what happens in this episode is that Leroy and Max end up taking Jermaine, who was the son of Leroy's old partner, to a Halloween party. And throughout this episode, Leroy and Max are trying to find this creature that's like spreading like some kind of virus that's like turning people into zombies. And it turns out that it was a cat that was spreading the virus, and it ends up biting Jermaine, and Jermaine ends up turning into a zombie. And when he goes to the Halloween party, he ends up affecting all the other kids who were at the party. So now Leroy and Max have to try and save all the kids from the zombie infestation before it's too late. So what are my thoughts about this episode? I thought this episode was like really hilarious to look at, and really touchy at the same time. Like, I like the fact that this episode focuses a bit more on Leroy's relationship with Jermaine and how he feels bad about letting his partner die, and how he's trying to make it up to his partner by taking care of his son Jermaine. And I also like the more comedic bits that Max provides throughout this episode, like how he tries to get into Leroy Jermaine's life, but he ends up coming off as being awkward, and Jermaine and Leroy are like, what's his problem? What is he doing here? But yeah, I like the balance between comedy and drama in this episode, even though this episode is more on the comedy side than the drama side. And it's also a really good Halloween episode to watch if you want to watch any TV shows that have Halloween episodes. I think this is like one of the funniest Halloween episodes I've seen. So overall, I gave Ghosted 4 stars, and that was number 3. Moving on to number 2, and that was the Orville Pria. So what happens in this episode is that Ed and the crew end up rescuing this girl named Pria from her ship that was starting to go down, and Ed ends up getting infatuated with Pria. But Kelly starts becoming suspicious of Pria, and she starts telling Ed, something's wrong with Pria. We don't know much about her, and we don't know if she's a threat to the ship or not. And Ed is like telling Kelly, you're just jealous that we broke up and I'm starting to have a relationship with Pria. And Kelly's like, no, that's not it at all. I still think that Pria is not up to no good, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. And that's pretty much the gist of this episode. So what are my thoughts about this episode? I thought this episode was very well done. Like, I like the fact that the usual running gag of the show was how Ed is still sore about his and Kelly's breakup, but we see that this episode takes this Ed's really divorce from Kelly in the more serious light. Like, we see that it has a lot of emotional turmoil for Ed himself, and we see that he's emotionally vulnerable because of his divorce with Kelly. And we also start to see that Kelly is still trying to protect Ed from getting his heart broken, even though she was the cause of Ed's getting his heart broken when she cheated on him. And that's what I really liked about this episode, was that it managed to make one of the show's running gags, Ed, who's still upset about his and Kelly's divorce, and turn into something more dramatic in this episode. And I like Charlize Theron's acting in this episode. Like, she's Pria in this episode, and I like how she's able to be calm throughout the episode while still being sneaky about certain things. So I think Charlize Theron's acting was very spot on in this episode. So overall, I gave the Orville Pria 4.5 stars, and that was number 2. Now moving on to my number 1 pick, and that was The Gifted Exposed, the pilot episode. So what happens in this episode is that we meet a family who are like living in a time when the mutants are being hunted by the government, and it turns out that the X-Men and the Brotherhood has somehow disappeared from this world. And what happens in this episode is that it turns out that the two kids, that the parents' kids, a girl and the boy, end up getting powers. And the parents were shocked at first because they didn't know that their kids had any mutant powers. But after they found out, they were like, "Oh no, we gotta get our kids out of this country because they're in a country where the government's gonna take any mutant in and try to experiment on them, and we don't want the same thing to happen to our kids. So we're gonna try to go all the way to Mexico to protect our kids." So because of that, the father who was experimenting on mutants, or at least taking the mutants in to get experimented on, he makes a deal with Lorna's group. Lorna, who's known as Polaris in the comics, she shows up in this episode, but she ends up getting captured at the beginning of the episode. And the father ends up making a deal with Lorna's crew that if they can get his family to Mexico, then he'll take the Lorna's group to Lorna and see if they could break Lorna out of jail or out of the prison that she's put in. And that's pretty much the gist of this episode, is that we see that the kids have mutant powers, and the family's trying to escape to Mexico so the kids won't get captured by the government. So what are my thoughts about this episode? I love this episode. Like, I never would have expected to such good storytelling in this episode, and I was curious about what would X-Men series be like without the X-Men, even though I am curious about the part where they said the X-Men disappeared from the world, and I wonder, how did the X-Men disappear? And is this like some kind of alternate universe? Did this take place after X-Men Days of Future Past, where the X-Men have to alter the timeline so they can save themselves, and maybe this is taking place in an alternate continuity where the X-Men did not exist? I am curious about all that, and I'm hoping that the X-Men do show up in some way or another, because it wouldn't be an X-Men series without the X-Men. But I'm hoping they show up. But I love this episode because the pacing was very well done. I like the action sequences. I was like sitting on the edge of my chair the whole time trying to figure out if the family was going to escape from the government, and how the mutants were going to help the kids get to Mexico. The whole family get to Mexico. And the ending was really shocking. I won't tell you what happened in the end, but it was really shocking, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next episode. But what I really loved the most about this episode was how the parents dealt with their kids having mutant powers. Like I mentioned, they were shocked at first, but then they were like, we're gonna take our kids to Mexico so the government won't get to them. And I like how the parents were like willing to sacrifice their own well-being just to protect their kids from the government. So I love that relationship between the kids and the parents, and I hope to see more of that relationship grow on in the future episodes. So overall, I gave The Gifted, the pilot episode, 4.75 stars, and that was my pick of the week. So that was my TV episode roundup for this week. And have you seen any of these shows? And if you did, what are your thoughts about all these shows? Please feel free to comment below. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter so I can keep you updated on any new videos I post up. And also, like my Facebook page, Rabbitearblog's Best Comments. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is Rabbitearblog, and I'll see you later.